Thursday morning. We are just over 60 days from the midterms. This is a big deal. Well, who better to talk to than the chair of the Republican National Committee? For the last 3 terms, it has been led by Ronna McDaniel, who was tapped by President Trump after my former boss, Reince Priebus, was tapped to be White House Chief of Staff. Lot to get to with Ronna in terms of her upbringing. Came from a very political family. Her grandfather was governor of Michigan. Her mother ran for office. Her uncle is Mitt Romney. How she navigated that as a child. So much how she's handling some of the duties of the RNC, what people don't understand about the role of the RNC. And then, interestingly, if she could be on a reality TV show, a lot of these guests kind of think for a moment. She knew right off the bat what she would be on. It's an interesting conversation. So much to get to with Ronna. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Without further ado, here we go. All right, well, we're just 60 some odd days out from the midterm elections, and no better guest to join us than the chair of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel. Ronna, good to be with you. Thanks for joining us.
Always good to be with you, Sean. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Listen, obviously, the point of this podcast is really to understand how somebody got where they are. And so, for the last 6 years, or going on almost 6 years, the last 3 terms, you've been the chair. And I think for people who've come up in the age of politics and Trump, you've been the only person they've known as the chair of the party. So I want to take people back a little. I think most people, or at least political observers, know you grew up in Michigan. You grew up in a very politically influential family. Your grandfather was governor. He ran for president. Your mom and grandmother both ran for office. Your uncle Mitt is obviously a senator, a former governor, ran for president. I think the question I want to get to is that a lot of kids grow up and sometimes don't necessarily understand the environment that they're growing up in, right? So sometimes you grow up really rich and you don't know it. Sometimes you grow up the son of or daughter of a celebrity. Did you know that you were like in a very political family?
I don't think so. I didn't know that other families didn't talk about politics at Sunday dinner. I mean, politics was all we talked about. And that was just normal. That was normal dinner fare, arguing and discussing and having very emotional conversations. And I always say I was the kid handing out flyers at the local library instead of on the soccer field because I was at campaign headquarters very young. So I don't think I realized it. Obviously, after a time, I think on a class field trip, I saw my grandpa in the Capitol, a picture of him, and I'm like, wait, my grandpa was governor? Like, I didn't even know until that field trip. It just was something that was around me. And then later I developed an awareness. And certainly it's helped me in this job growing up in that environment.
Did other kids know? Were they like, okay, there's Ronna, her dad's important, her grandfather's important? Or was it you like had that experience that it was around you, but it wasn't part of the daily battle rhythm, if you will?
No, other kids did not know, but their parents definitely knew. And some of my teachers definitely knew in high school. I definitely had some teachers who penalized me for being a Republican or would write snarky comments on my papers or I'd have like a guy that I was dating whose parents were not paying attention and then they realized who my grandpa was and they'd be a lot nicer to me. So I had that sometimes, but over the kids in my grade, kids don't care, just like my kids don't care. They don't care that I'm the RNC chair. Their friends don't really understand what that means. And it's great, especially I still live in Michigan and being out of the DC bubble. I'm just Nash and Abby's mom. That's who I am. And that's fine with me.
So, I know from reading your background that you started working in politics in terms of getting a paycheck in a political media firm. As you've ascended in politics, what did that experience do to help you understand the business? Because at the RNC, and even as state party chair, you dealt with a lot of vendors, people who make the trains go. They buy the media, they put the ads up. What did that do to you in terms of help you in the position you have now?
It was huge, Sean. I worked for a political consulting firm out of college, and I actually became the head of the political department, which meant I was doing all the billing for all the candidates. And we had a lot of candidates across the country. for the film shoots and then for the edit suites and getting the commercials on air. So when I became Michigan chair, I took over all the signing for the building. I did every single contract at the beginning just to understand the expenses. But then also with our vendors, I knew not to let a TV vendor charge us 10% to place our media buy. I would only do 3%. And these were things that at the staff level, those are the things they usually take care of. But as a chair, I was really in the weeds on that. And I've still done that as RNC chair too, really involved in spreading it out, not being beholden to one vendor, and making sure our staff isn't getting kickback from vendors for placing things with their friends. I mean, it can be a kind of tight environment, ecosystem, and you want to make sure that we're doing the best for the candidates and for the party. And I think we've done that at the RNC.
We talked about your family. They'd all run for elected office. Your grandparents, your father, your mother, your grandmother, your uncle. Why did you at one point, I read an interview where you talk about needing to get involved in party politics to help get your family some wins. I think that was a little tongue in cheek, but why did you decide to pursue the party route of politics as opposed to the elective route?
Yeah, I don't think it was intentional. And I think my advice to women getting involved in politics is make that a goal. For me, it just happened. I was a grassroots person. I was involved as a precinct delegate. And candidly, Sean, when my Uncle Mitt received the nomination for president, he never came to Michigan post nomination. And a lot of that was from his DC consultants saying Michigan's a write-off state. You can't win it. And that really, really motivated me because I felt like Michigan was a winnable state and that we could win it presidentially. And so in 2016, when I was Michigan chair, I made that case to Donald Trump and he listened. He listened to local people, which is one of the things I really liked about him. He wasn't always beholden to the DC mindset. And he came to our state over and over again and won Michigan for the first time in 30 years. So
yeah, but I want to get to that, Ronna, because it's interesting. No one had won Michigan since '88,
yeah.
right? You go to him and say, "Come to Michigan." Now, and he credits you for that. I mean, he'll say it in substitutes. Ronna McDaniel's telling me to come to Michigan, and da da da. If you had been wrong, that would have been a lot of money and a lot of time for a presidential candidate, and that he could have been spending somewhere else. Why did you feel so confident? Because what was the vote total? 16,000 votes?
Yeah, it was less than that. It was like 10,000. I ran for chair on that, by the way. I ran for Michigan chair saying we can win presidentially. And the thing that's unique about Michigan in 2016 is we had no other statewide office. We didn't have governor, attorney general, nothing statewide was on the ballot except president. That was it. So that was the whole ball game. And I just believed, if you look at the George Bush election against Bill Clinton, Ross Perot took about 19% of the vote in Michigan. We had a Republican governor, a Republican House and Senate. I just believe Michigan was ripe for a win, and there were tides changing if a candidate was willing to give the people of Michigan their time. And Donald Trump listened, and luckily it worked out. And I think that that's true across the Midwest, not just Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. These are states that were flyover country for Republicans for far too long. And now we're investing in.
Right. But see, the thing is, and I want to just drill down on this for a second, because I get that. Like I every time I go in an election, I tell people that, like, and you know this from being involved, when you put your heart and soul into a campaign, no matter whether it's for dog catcher, for president, you feel like you've invested so much that you just got to win, right? It doesn't matter what the polls say. But I get what you're saying, but did you see data? Was it voter registration drives? What was it that you said? Because there was a reason the DC folks kept saying, whether it was Romney or McCain or Bush, oh, don't bother going to Michigan. But what did you see that said, if you spend the time, there is enough registration switch here, there's enough persuadable people? What was it that you said, hey, I'm willing to put my name on the line, that you should spend some time and money here?
So I was just seeing it everywhere. I mean, I think the first thing was just Macomb County. We started to see some shift there, and we felt like, but we've got a chance with these Reagan Democrats if we invest over here. But it was data. And then it built, right? As the election was going on, We started to see the numbers in Macomb. We started doing more door knocks there using RNC data, which was critical as well, which obviously, Sean, you were a big part of, and Reince. Um, but we absolutely were seeing the data. But then also Trump came to Michigan very early on in his candidacy and as in the primary. And he did a rally in kind of the east side of Michigan, and 3,000 people showed up. And guess what? They weren't our voters, because we had a petition drive for it's going to be too complicated to go into, but we had a petition drive that union voters were not supporting, and they wouldn't sign this petition. And I thought, these are new voters for us. We can win Michigan. I remember coming to the RNC and circling Michigan all the time, trying to get more money invested in Michigan. I just believed it. I believed it, and I believed Donald Trump was the right person to do it.
So obviously the bet pays off. You win
Yeah.
Michigan big time. And then he taps you as chair, only the second woman after Mary Louise Smith to be a female head of the RNC. What surprised you walking in the door? What was sort of hey, I went from running a state party that I knew, I was familiar, you're familiar, obviously vastly familiar with the state of Michigan, but what surprised you about going from that to maybe the national stage under Donald Trump?
Everything. I mean, Sean, I mean, it was such a huge leap. And I mean, you were so helpful, and really there were so many wonderful mentors in that situation, because it was such a huge leap. I do recall Richard Walters, who ended up being my chief of staff, saying to me, if you raise money, you're going to get your job done. And so I really hunkered down and traveled the country to raise the money so that we could make sure to have the fuel to be competitive. And that was a lot of work, introducing myself to investors who didn't know who I was. I was this lady from Michigan, this mom from Michigan. Why would I give her money? So that took a lot of time and energy. But what I know is if you put the work in, it pays dividends. And we worked really, really hard.
So when you, and I got this question during my 6 years at the RNC, but when you meet with donors and grassroots supporters, what do you think surprises you about what they don't know about what the RNC does?
Yeah, I think there's a ton that the long-term investors, Sean, that have given to the RNC, and even grassroots, they don't totally understand the RNC. I can't even tell you how many times people tell me about a TV ad we should run, because we don't do TV, right? We're the ground game. So the way I always describe it, which I think is easier, is candidates get a certain amount of money. It's critical that they get that money to go on TV, but we're building a road. We're the infrastructure that all the candidates drive on. And it takes a lot of time and energy to build voter registration, get out the vote, absentee chase, all the things that the RNC does by training volunteers. Now we can train poll watchers. It's just a massive, massive 2-year undertaking. The community centers we're putting in Black, Asian, and Hispanic communities. This is what the RNC does. And the candidates can plug into that infrastructure once they win their nomination. And they need us to be building that road long before they're even the nominee. And it's hard to explain that to people, because it's not the sexy stuff, right? It's kind of the nuts and bolts of the party.
So I want to get your take on this, because one of the things that I always thought was interesting, among many, is that Trump elevated women both in the Trump organization and in politics. You think about the number of women that held high and influential positions in his administration, and obviously you running the party, the second woman only to hold that role. And yet every time he did something that on the left, it would be heralded, it would be a magazine spread, it would be a profile piece. And yet it was like constantly a discussion about fights with, how you juxtapose an issue with your Uncle Mitt, or something about your maiden name and whether you're using or not. But what does it say to you about how the media, I don't want to relitigate those arguments. I'd rather just, but what does it say to you that the media focused everything about, instead of saying, wow, here is this person in Trump elevating these women who have been successful, who have accomplished things to higher positions, to higher authority to operate. And instead of going, but what the media would do is then go in and find a place to sort of nitpick and say, but you know what he did do is he went in and he did this to him and he did that to him. I think it's funny, because for all of us, who went from one level, if you will, to another, meaning this higher level that was exponential in Trump world, there was a media fascination and intensity that had never existed. But for you, what was that like?
Yeah, I think growing up around it, it helped me kind of tune it out sometimes and just know that the news will pass the next day. And I will say this, I don't love being the news story. I like being in the news with my quotes. I don't love being the news. Maybe that's why I've never been a candidate running for office. But the thing that always sustained me was the support of President Trump, candidly. You know, DC, Sean, you know this better than anybody. It's a backbiting world. It's not, it's a power vacuum. And a lot of people come at you and from a lot of different places. And every time that happened, President Trump would have my back. And it was nice to have that faith in me that he gave. And it was something that really sustained me, especially during difficult times. And I recall these stories, and the thing that the media doesn't do is they negate our truths. Some of the stories that we have, like I hurt my back one day. I was really down and out after flying how many miles. And I remember President Trump calling and being like, "Are you doing okay? Is there anything I can do? Do I need to get a doctor? Like, we can't have you out." Like, those are the types of stories that I wish people heard more of, or me dropping my son off at school with the president calling me on the phone, and my son getting frustrated and playing music loud, and the president saying, "I think you've got something more important to do right now. We can talk later." Um, those are those types of things that really happen. My son's like, "I don't care that you're talking to the president." Um, and so those are the types of real moments. I remember one day he called me and said, "Do you just have some time so we can just talk and I can get to know you a little bit better?" And we just spent about a half hour talking about my family and my background. And he asked question after question, and he was so interested. And those are the types of things that people don't see about him that I wish they did.
Yeah, it's funny. I get asked all the time in speeches what's something we don't know about President Trump. And I say something very similar to what you just did. It's just fascinating how many times he reaches out to people that they don't know about, and B, just how empathetic he can be. It's almost like he does. I always argue that to some degree, I don't know that he wants people to know that. I think he likes that tough exterior, but that's a whole separate discussion. You mentioned your kids a couple times. I've asked this of a couple different guests on this podcast because it's interesting how I handle it, and I'm always intrigued how other people handle it. How do you balance that decision when you're in the public spotlight like you are? And I know your kids are a little bit older than mine, to include them or not in some of these discussions. I understand, like, your daughter did a profile piece at one point. Like, where's that line between I want to protect you and I want you to be able to go out and be part of the process?
Yeah, I mean, you want them to see it, right, Sean? Because it is unique and it's part of their upbringing. So what a great opportunity for them to see it, but you also don't want to shove it down their throat. And politics is vitriolic, right? So they're going to take heat if they post something. I remember my daughter posted something about being at the convention with the fireworks at the White House, and somebody immediately attacked her on Instagram. And actually a Democrat in her school got on and said, "Stop this.
Right.
She deserves to enjoy this, and like, we need to be polite." And the person took down the comments. So those are the things that break your heart, when your kids get targeted and for something exciting like being at the White House. But for me, I asked them. My kids are older. My daughter's in college and our son's in a senior in high school. So we asked them. I actually just took my son to a community center opening in Connecticut, and he got on the podium and spoke, and in front of cameras, and I was blown away
Right.
that he was so willing to do that. But it's always, I always leave it up to them now, because I'm not going to put them in a situation where they feel attacked, because it's hard. I take it, but I can take it, but it's harder for them, I think.
Yeah, I think it's right. And obviously being a little bit older makes a bit of a difference. You mentioned Trump. I firmly believe, and I think a lot of folks do, that he's unequivocally going to run in 2024. Walk me through, as somebody who's been who was initially plucked by Trump to lead this party, who has obviously then been reelected twice on their own. But how do you, in a 2024 cycle stay neutral with Donald Trump and potential other candidates?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's not even up to the RNC. The RNC doesn't decide who the nominee is. There's a process in place, and the process that's been in place for decades is still in place, which is you got to go win Iowa, and then you got to go win New Hampshire, and then you got to go win South Carolina and Nevada, and you're going to have to get the delegate total to win the nomination. And so that's what it's going to take state by state. None of that can change. It's not going to change. The rules are in place. And so just by the nature of the process, it's a neutral process. But of course, I have a great relationship with President Trump. And I know a lot of the other people who may potentially run. I don't know if they'll run if he runs, but my focus right now is 2022, and we just have to win these midterms. And so I don't like jumping to 2024. And I use this analogy on Fox and Friends. They didn't totally get it, but I'm like, we have to win the playoff before we can talk about the Super Bowl. The midterms are the playoffs, and we've got to win back the House and the Senate before we can talk about the presidential in 2024.
Can I tell you something though, just so you know?
Yeah.
If you use that analogy on Newsmax, we will get it. I promise you.
I know they did not get it. I was like,
yeah,
I'm a big
we're a
football
little bit
fan.
more of a sophisticated sports playing audience, just so you know. So save those. You can dumb it down for certain audiences, but feel free to bring that game.
Okay, on Newsmax. All right. Sounds good.
Let me ask you this. Regardless of who wins, I think we'll take back the White House in 2024 because this has just been an absolute utter disaster the last 4 years. Traditionally, Reince being one of the folks, but I mean, you go back on both sides of the aisle, Democrat, Republican chairs of the party, the chairman or chair gets an administration role, commerce secretary, ambassador to whatever, or something. Is that something that you'd be interested in if the Republicans, whomever, took back the party in 2024?
That is so far down the road. I can't even think about something like that. But I don't even know. I just want to win back the White House. I mean,
you don't want to be the ambassador to the Bahamas?
Yeah, ambassador to Bahamas sounds great. I don't think the Democrats would pass me through. But I definitely.
Well, if you get a super majority in the Senate,
yeah, that's right.
Worry
about. Secretary of Defense. I think that's right at my.
Well,
just kidding.
Listen, I'll tell you the one thing about something like that is, you know how early the SecDef gets in. I need something that's strolling in at this point at like 10:30, 11.
Exactly. I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. I'm very fired up about education right now. I'm so disappointed in the Biden administration. And it's very personal for me watching my son work with his SAT and trying to get into college, and watching these kids who literally didn't get an education for 2 years that Democrats called virtual schooling. That's a joke.
Right.
And to see the Biden administration give $1 trillion in student loan forgiveness instead of shoring up these kids who we know now have math deficits, reading deficits. We know millions of kids were lost that never logged on. I mean, it is such a stark reminder of their priorities. Instead of saving the kids that they left behind, they decided to try and buy votes from Harvard and Yale grads. And I think it's disgusting. And I think we need to speak out more and more vocally, and moms should be enraged that that was the Democrats' priority instead of helping our kids who were left behind in these Democrat states.
And that's a pretty compelling case for Secretary of Education. I'm just going to note that for the record. All right. So last question before we get to the lightning round. You've served. Now, listen, you and I both know Reince Priebus, your predecessor, my former boss. Reince, knows to the second how long he was RNC chair.
Yeah.
And he always likes to talk about how he was the longest serving modern day, or I don't even know what whatever. You will now have served 3 terms.
Yes.
If you, regardless of whether you go for a 4th term or not, if you serve the 3rd term, has somebody, whether it's on your staff or you, done the math? Will you become the longest serving RNC chair?
I think Reince has done the math.
And
no, I don't know. I have no idea. Well,
he's done it.
I know.
Okay, so.
I'm so excited for Reince to be the head of the finance for the Milwaukee convention. He's just the perfect person. He loves the party. And
listen,
He built the RNC. I mean, he revolutionized the RNC, and I was able to, stand on his shoulders. So
Listen, I don't think that there's anybody who lives and breathes like yeah, I mean,
yes, he loves it.
he loves
He knows every committee man still. He knows every person on the RNC.
Oh, I know. Yes, I'm well aware, but it'll be interesting. So do you want a fourth term?
Oh, Sean, there's not even an answer to that question until we
Yes,
get.
there is.
No, there's not. We have to get through the midterms.
Oh, very, very diplomatic. All right. I'm not gonna be Jim Acosta. I'm gonna let you off on that. We go to a lightning round in this. Are you ready?
Yep, ready.
All right. When you travel, do you arrive early or just in time?
Early.
Well, how low will you let your phone battery go?
14%.
Oh, wow. How many unread emails do you currently have?
Like thousands.
Okay. If you had 48 hours to binge any show, what would it be?
Game of Thrones.
On a scale, how clean do you think your house is?
Very. Like
What
10.
is your least favorite chore?
Laundry.
Yes, I'm with you on that. If you could have a drink, it could be any kind of drink with
Diet Coke.
anybody, who would it be?
A Diet Coke with my husband from McDonald's. A large Diet Coke from McDonald's with my husband. We call him Big Honkin'. We get big Diet Cokes every day.
All right. In this job and during the Trump administration, I'm sure you've met a lot of people. Who is the coolest celebrity that you've met?
Elon Musk.
Biggest pet peeve?
People being late.
What is something that Ronna McDaniel will not go cheap on?
Lots of things. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. What do you consider cheap? I'm from the Midwest, so
I mean, like some people won't go cheap on toilet paper. I think that that's one area that you can easily, like, there's certain things that some people say like ketchup. They won't go like, there's some things that you just have to have.
Probably my skincare stuff, because I travel so much and my skin dries out. So
All right. Fair enough. I was on Dancing with the Stars. If you had to be on a reality television show, what would you go on?
Real Housewives of
Okay.
something.
All right, real quick. This is it. Pronounce the following: data or data?
Data.
Gala or gala?
Gala.
Iran or Iran?
Iran.
Caramel or caramel?
Caramel.
Aunt or aunt?
Aunt.
Ronna McDaniel, this has been fun. Thank you for spending your morning with us. As we head into these final few days, I know how precious your time is, and so thank you for spending it with us.
Thanks, Sean. Always good to be with you. That was fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. As we head into the final stretch before the midterm elections, it's always good to know who some of these people are and where they came from. Obviously, we heard from Reince Priebus a few weeks ago. That was a really different conversation because I had worked for Reince for all 6 years that he was the chair. So I knew him really well, a lot to ask, but it's fun getting to know Ronna a little bit. And it's interesting what her priorities are, where she sees things right now. Especially as we head into these final days and what the priorities are and how she's navigating Trump. And you heard her talk about that and how they'll handle him if he's the nominee, this idea of neutrality. So it's really interesting because I think, to Ronna's point about the RNC, and I dealt with this a lot during my 6 years, there's a lot of people who think they know what the party should do. And there's always this distinction between the party, which is the national party, the state party, the grassroots, and the RNC. And the RNC, as I always like to tell people, is the league. Those are the people who just set the rules. There's 200 people in a building in Washington, D.C., and that's it. There's 168 members of the RNC, a chairman, a national committee man, and a national committee woman from every state. And that's who represents you to the RNC. But it is just like a board of directors. And so every time someone says, oh, the RNC is doing that or this, it's like, really? Because that's their job. They raise money and then they transfer it out. They transfer it to state parties. They transfer it to the congressional committee, to the senatorial committee. And there's this view of what the RNC should be doing. And sometimes it's valid, to be honest with you. And sometimes it's not, because it's not the role of what they do. But it was good to get Ronna's take on this, because so often that's what, people have this impression of what things should be happening. And it's not necessarily an accurate impression. So I was really excited to have this conversation with her. And then who knows, maybe we will see her on the Real Housewives or as Secretary of Education. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Look forward to seeing you back here on Monday. Appreciate everybody who is subscribing and reviewing. Super helpful. Thank you. I can see the little 5-star marks go on Apple and Spotify and all the other places where you're downloading. So please take a moment to do that. It helps so much with the growth of this podcast. And I got 2 kids, so it's putting them through putting clothes on their back and food in their mouths. Otherwise, you never know where they end up. Anyway, thanks so much. I'll see you back here Monday on Beyond the Briefing.